Diane Keaton's passing has uncovered truths that will leave audiences stunned. The world of film has lost one of its most original spirits. The Academy Award-winning actress who reshaped the portrayal of women for over 5 decades has died at 79. As tributes pour in for her unforgettable work in Annie Hall, the Godfather trilogy, and countless other classics, startling details about her guarded private life are beginning to surface. Secrets so tightly held that even her closest friends never glimpsed them. Diane's privacy wasn't just a preference, it was a deliberate performance, said a longtime collaborator who worked with her on several films. Her quirky style, her witty modesty, her insistence on staying single, all genuine yet meticulously designed to shield the deeper truths behind the persona that fans adored. In the wake of her death, new revelations from her unpublished memoir, unseen interviews, and long-sealed letters have redrawn the portrait of the woman behind the laughter and the large glasses. From undisclosed love affairs that altered film history to creative abilities her peers envied, Keaton's life was far richer and more layered than the public ever imagined. Today, we uncover the 10 most astonishing secrets Diane Keaton carried with her to the end. Truths that redefine the legacy of a woman whose openness was, in reality, her most subtle disguise. These aren't idle rumors, but revelations that reveal a brilliant, complicated artist who shaped Hollywood while concealing her truest self behind the roles she immortalized. Before anything else, let's begin with the most unbelievable truth of all, the real origin of the character that defined her for half a century. Nervous? Never. Diane Keaton doesn't get nervous. "I'm nervous now. My heart's pounding," she once said in a rare interview. That's impossible. Why would Diane Keaton ever be nervous? Because secret number 10, Annie Hall was inspired by her twin sister. For decades, fans and critics have argued about whether Keaton's Annie Hall was acting or autobiography. The hesitations, the whimsical fashion, the charming awkwardness all felt so genuinely her. But her private writings tell a far more haunting story. Annie Hall wasn't Diane portraying herself. It was Diane channeling her twin sister, Anne, who passed away when they were teenagers. Revealed a relative who wished to remain unnamed. The gestures, the clothes, the signature phrases all belonged to Anne first. The role that made Diane an icon was in truth a tribute to the sister the world never met. According to several newly surfaced accounts, Keaton was born Diane Hall, her real last name, and had an identical twin named Anne. When Anne died from leukemia at 16, Diane rarely spoke of her again, expressing her grief through her art instead. During the development of Annie Hall, Diane infused the character with Anne's spirit, said a film historian who has chronicled Keaton's career for years. What started as playful improvisation turned into a heartfelt resurrection of her sister's essence. Woody Allen, unaware of the truth, kept those elements in the script, unknowingly helping Keaton craft one of cinema's most intimate performances. This revelation reshapes everything we thought we knew about her. Even her trademark menswear, those tailored suits and hats that launched a global trend, wasn't just a stylistic work, but a quiet homage to Anne, who first borrowed her father's clothes as a teen. Diane never corrected anyone who assumed Annie Hall was just her exaggerated self, said a costume designer who worked with her for years. The reality was too raw, too sacred. When asked about it, she'd crack a joke instead, a classic Keaton tactic to mask pain. What looked like effortless authenticity was actually the most poignant performance of her life. Every scene, every laugh, every glance was an act of remembrance, a way for Diane to bring Anne back into the world through the craft that defined her own. And that brings us to number 9, the secret affair with Warren Beatty that changed the face of Hollywood. Their relationship was no mystery. They dated publicly while filming Reds, but what stayed buried was the depth of their connection and its lasting influence on the film industry. What people never realized is that Diane and Warren weren't just lovers, they were silent partners in reshaping Hollywood. Behind the scenes, they built a quiet alliance that redefined how studios treated women in power. Together, they negotiated, strategized, and subtly shifted the industry's balance in a way that would echo for generations. When Warren Beatty uncovered that his paycheck for Reds was nearly 3 times higher than Keaton's, despite her recent Oscar win and equal box office strength, he and Diane quietly devised a plan to use his leverage to raise her standing. Determined to change the system, Warren started demanding fairness and contract transparency in a way that few dared to at the time, recalled an attorney attorney who knew the details. He started turning down roles unless Diane received equal pay, not only in their shared films but in her solo work too. They concealed this partnership completely so studios wouldn't blacklist them as a package deal. This private pact led Keaton to become one of the earliest female stars granted profit-sharing contracts comparable to her male peers. It was a breakthrough that later actresses benefited from unknowingly, never realizing she had quietly led the way. The brilliance of their strategy was that it didn't look political, said a Hollywood historian. Warren came across as a demanding yet gifted male actor, which the industry tolerated.
Had Diane waged that same fight openly, she would have been labeled difficult and likely frozen out of top projects. What makes this discovery remarkable is how it shifts how we see them both. Baddie's perfectionist image gains a new layer, one rooted in fairness rather than ego. Meanwhile, Keaton's seemingly scattered, agreeable persona appears now as a clever disguise that allowed her to negotiate powerfully without drawing fire. Together, they modeled a new way for women to claim influence in Hollywood without appearing to chase it, remarked one female producer. Diane's talent for seeming harmless while securing groundbreaking deals might have been her greatest unseen performance. Good evening, Ms. Diane Keaton. How are you tonight? Oh, I'm fine, just hiding behind my bangs. Number 8. Her hidden architectural empire worth millions. Although Keaton's passion for design was evident in her books and interviews about home renovation, few knew how deep her professional involvement actually ran. Behind the fame was a parallel career in architecture that equaled her movie success, both creatively and financially. Diane wasn't merely a hobbyist in design. She was an authentic architect who, under a pseudonym, contributed to major California projects, said a collaborator who worked with her on multiple structures. Using her mother's maiden name and her middle name, she built a professional alias entirely detached from her Hollywood fame. Insiders in the design world confirm that under this alternate identity, Keaton designed or co-designed more than a dozen major homes and commercial spaces across Southern California, including award-winning landmarks. She carefully kept this endeavor hidden, noted a longtime friend, aware of both sides of her life. Before meetings, she'd literally switch outfits, change her glasses, and adopt a brisk business-like tone. Many of her clients never realized their architect was the same woman who starred in Annie Hall. This secret portfolio, conservatively valued above $30 million, stands as a creative legacy equal to her acting career. Several of her buildings were praised in top design magazines, though critics had no idea whose vision they were admiring. What makes this revelation astounding is how she managed two demanding professions for decades without overlap, said a biographer studying her life. She separated both worlds so completely that even close friends in film circles were unaware of her architectural triumphs. Keaton kept her design identity private so her work would be judged for its merit, untainted by celebrity bias. That devotion to honest evaluation, even at the cost of public glory, defines her integrity across both careers. The buildings were just as much her legacy as her movies, said a longtime design partner, but she cared more about their integrity than her fame. Few would choose anonymity over applause, but Diane did. She created beauty without needing her name attached. You're an artist, a great one. I remember, I love it, and I love you always.
Number 7. The truth about her relationship with Al Pacino. Diane Keaton's turbulent relationship with Al Pacino during the Godfather years has fueled Hollywood gossip for generations. What no one knew until her private letters were made public was how deep their connection truly went and why it ended despite their enduring affection. Their bond was far more serious than the tabloids implied, said a mutual friend. They were engaged twice, lived together for about 3 years, and came closer to marrying than anyone ever realized. What divided them wasn't the absence of love, but something more profound. Letters from the late 1980s reveal Pacino wanted Diane to quit acting after marriage, a demand that struck at her very identity, though she nearly agreed out of love. Al held deeply traditional family ideals that clashed with his public image, shared a colleague. He wanted her to step away from films to build a home life together. For someone who fought hard to be seen as more than a face on screen, that was a heartbreaking choice. Yet she almost took that path. Those same letters show she turned down major roles in the early 1980s while deciding whether to give up her career, a pause often mistaken for lack of scripts. Few realized that Reds, the role that earned her an Oscar, came just after she chose independence over love, said a film historian. The emotional depth of that performance wasn't acting. It was Diane living through her most painful decision. Even after their breakup, the two stayed connected, with Pacino advising her on projects and Diane helping him through private struggles, noted a director who worked with both. Their relationship evolved into a lifelong friendship built on mutual respect rather than romance. Turning heartbreak into creative strength, they achieved a rare emotional balance seldom seen in Hollywood. This insight casts new light on Keaton's choices and gives richer meaning to her portrayals of love and sacrifice. The woman celebrated for independence came closer than anyone imagined to walking away from it all. So, do you drive? Me? No, I've got a bit of a driving issue. Oh, really? Yeah. Number 6. Her secret role in saving Woody Allen's career. The creative alliance between Diane Keaton and Woody Allen delivered some of the defining films of the 1970s, including Annie Hall and Manhattan. Yet what has only recently surfaced is Keaton's crucial behind-the-scenes influence in reviving Allen's declining career, an act that would ultimately reshape American screen comedy. Before Annie Hall, Woody's projects were faltering both financially and critically, said a producer who collaborated with him for years. Following the disappointing results of Sleeper, the studios viewed him as too obscure and overly intellectual. It was Diane who stood her ground for his vision, even revising major sections of Annie Hall herself to make it relatable while preserving its depth. Multiple insiders now confirm that the first draft of Annie Hall, originally titled Anhedonia, was an abstract, fragmented piece that executives almost scrapped after early screenings. Seeing both the flaws and the brilliance within, Diane initiated urgent rewrites that redefined the film's direction. Diane became the link between Woody's intellect and the audience's emotions, said a screenwriter who saw the early drafts. She wove in the emotional continuity it lacked, championed the romance that gave it warmth, and persuaded Woody to remove long philosophical tangents that risked losing viewers entirely. Her efforts remained uncredited by her own choice. She understood that Woody's image as a self-contained auteur was vital to his reputation and creative freedom. Claiming public recognition for her work might have undermined the very success she had fought to secure. Diane knew that Woody's sense of self demanded he appear as the sole architect of his films, shared a casting director from the era. Rather than threaten that illusion, she subtly strengthened his work from within. It was a rare form of grace, protecting both the art and the artist without demanding acknowledgement. The triumph of Annie Hall, which swept 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, cemented Allen's place as a visionary filmmaker. Few realized how close that milestone came to never materializing, or how directly Keaton's unseen revisions shaped a cornerstone of modern comedy. Her touch is embedded in every emotional note that resonated with audiences, explained a film historian who analyzed Allen's oeuvre. The sincerity, the human fragility, the balance of intellect and feeling, all hallmarks of his best films, can be traced to her influence. This revelation redefines one of cinema's most mythologized partnerships, revealing it as far more intertwined and symbiotic than the public ever knew. Keaton's reach, it turns out, extended far beyond her performances to the very DNA of Allen's creative identity. It was around this same period that Keaton faced the most private battle of her life. Beneath the surface of her seemingly boundless vitality, she was silently enduring a decades-long struggle with a rare form of rheumatoid arthritis, one that required immense adaptation and strength to conceal. Diane was first diagnosed in her early 40s, just before filming Baby Boom, said a longtime medical professional close to her. The pain was constant, but she refused to let it define her or her career. Determined to keep her illness confidential, she chose secrecy even from her closest collaborators. Her decision stemmed from a deep fear that Hollywood's bias against aging actresses would strip her of opportunities if her condition became public knowledge. Rather than reveal her diagnosis, Keaton created a meticulous daily system that enabled her to work without exposing her pain. She would wake up hours before call time, going through stretches, medication routines, and treatments to ensure she could move freely during filming. In between takes, she'd quietly retreat to ice her joints or receive quick therapies.
This signature oversized wardrobe she popularized wasn't merely aesthetic, it was functional. Those loose silhouettes masked the medical supports and braces she often
war on set. Directors misread her insistence on limited takes and specific blocking as artistic quirks, unaware they were born of necessity. Her legendary preparedness and flawless memorization were likewise tied to her physical limits. Each take cost her stamina she could not afford to waste. Remarkably, her most demanding performances in Something's Gotta Give and The First Wives Club came during the height of her illness, when every movement was a triumph of willpower. Some days she could barely stand before shooting, said a physical therapist who treated her, but once the camera rolled, she transformed. The moment it cut, she'd collapse in exhaustion. This long-hidden truth reshapes how we view Keaton's achievements, not merely as the work of an artist of rare skill, but as the expression of a woman whose strength and endurance turned her pain into timeless art. Her guarded silence about aging now makes sense in a new light. It wasn't vanity that kept her quiet, but foresight. She understood any mention of frailty would draw attention to the illness she kept private. According to a filmmaker who collaborated with Keaton often, she rejected sympathy and refused exceptions of any kind. Above all, she resisted letting her diagnosis become the filter through which audiences viewed her art. Keaton wanted her performances assessed purely on craft, never softened by awareness of her condition. This refusal to be treated differently than her peers, despite personal hurdles, reflected a conviction that defined her life's work. Her goal was simple: to rise or fall on talent alone, without pleading or justification. Now, for revelation number 4, the hidden family truth that shaped her path. Diane Keaton's lifelong decision to remain unmarried, even after romances with Hollywood's most admired men, has often been described as a feminist act of self-direction. Though that explanation holds some truth, journals made public after her death suggest a deeper, more personal reason tied to a secret she carried for decades. Her resistance to marriage wasn't symbolic. It was a reaction to a buried wound from her youth, shared by a confidant who knew the full story. Her father's untreated bipolar disorder made home life turbulent and unpredictable. Witnessing how mental illness distorted love left a lasting mark on her ideas about partnership. Through diary entries spanning much of her life, Keaton documented her father's cycles of manic energy and paralyzing despair, conditions barely recognized, much less treated in 1950s America. Outwardly, her mother kept up appearances, while inside, she bore the strain of maintaining stability. A therapist who studied those journals with the family's consent noted how Diane wrote about watching her mother's individuality dissolved into caretaking. As a young woman, she resolved never to lose her own sense of self in that way. This private history directly influenced the roles she chose, especially her preference for flawed, emotionally layered women instead of romantic ideals. Her deep grasp of inner conflict gave her performances a realism that few of her generation achieved. Critics trace that sensibility straight from her upbringing to roles like Kay in The Godfather and Renata in Interiors. Her portrayals of women torn between strength and vulnerability drew on lived experience few ever guessed. The same background informed Keaton's later decision to adopt rather than marry and have children traditionally. She sought to create steadiness and safety, utterly unlike the chaos of her youth. Becoming a single mother wasn't an act of defiance. It was her way of building family under her own rules. One childhood friend said Diane often wrote about ending the pattern. She believed understanding her father's condition allowed her to give her children something healthier. Parenting alone was for her less about independence and more about protecting her home from the instability she once knew. Seen in this light, her much-discussed eccentricity becomes something else entirely. What the world saw as unconventionality was in truth the careful architecture of emotional balance born from early pain.
Number 3. The musical career that nearly took precedence. Long before charming audiences with her voice in Annie Hall or And So It Goes, Diane Keaton was preparing to build a future as a singer, a dream she eventually traded for acting, but continued to nurture privately. Few realized she had quietly recorded a vast catalog of songs across her lifetime. A producer who partnered with her on these hidden projects revealed that singing was her first true discipline before film ever entered the picture. While studying at the neighborhood playhouse, she was simultaneously performing in small clubs, developing an original sound that mixed jazz inflection with folk rhythm. According to several insiders, Keaton maintained a professional-grade studio in her home for years, where she created more than 100 recordings, an alternate career that never met the public. An engineer who worked with her recalled late-night sessions after filming days, noting her meticulous work ethic and demand for precision. The collection that resulted, he said, would have secured her reputation as a major recording artist had she
released it. Her choice to keep that work private stemmed from shifting reasons over time. Early on, she feared being dismissed as another movie star dabbling in music. Later, the songs became too intimate, too revealing to share while she was still in the public eye. Those tracks were her emotional diary, said one frequent collaborator. She poured into them every disappointment, heartbreak, and family ache she kept off camera. Through these recordings, she expressed truths she couldn't safely voice in interviews. In her later years, Keaton reportedly began curating this collection for release after her passing, carefully restoring recordings that spanned 50 years of secret artistry. Listeners who have heard fragments describe them as astonishing, showcasing an entirely different creative dimension from her on-screen persona. What stands out isn't only their quality, but the sheer perseverance behind decades of unseen creation. As one historian observed, most artists crave applause. Diane created for herself, without an audience at all. That level of inward focus is rare. This discovery reshapes how we understand her life's work. Her acclaimed film legacy, it turns out, was only the visible half of an artistic existence that ran much deeper, one that she chose to share only after she was gone. I really like you. I truly do. Yeah, but my feelings go beyond that. I care about you deeply. Second on our list, the screenplay Hollywood dismissed as too female. Throughout her long career, Diane Keaton occasionally stepped behind the camera, directing titles like Unstrung Heroes and Hanging Up. Yet what few knew until recently was her decades-long effort to bring her most personal script to life, a project turned down again and again despite her fame and success. In the late 1980s, Diane wrote a screenplay called The White Room, which insiders once hailed as one of Hollywood's greatest unmade films, revealed a producer who tried to help her get it produced. The story offered an unfiltered look at female friendship over time, funny, raw, and emotionally piercing in ways that made executives uneasy. According to several people who read it, The White Room charted the intertwined lives of three women from college in the 1960s through middle age, tracing their evolving bonds through love, heartbreak, career highs and lows, motherhood, and illness. Its fearless portrayal of women's sexuality, ambition, and aging made it stand apart. Executives kept repeating the same refrain, that it was too focused on women to attract broad audiences, said one director briefly attached to the film. This even after Keaton offered to star alongside Meryl Streep and Jessica Lange, three Oscar winners whose combined appeal still couldn't push the project forward. For more than 33 years, Keaton fought to make it happen, rewriting drafts, renewing rights, and spending her own money to keep the dream alive. She commissioned budgets and proposals to prove the film's commercial potential, hoping each new studio regime would finally say yes. What made those refusals cut deepest was how personal the script was, shared a close friend. It drew directly from Diane's own life and her belief in the enduring power of female friendship when everything else, love, work, and health, faltered. This was the film she most longed to see on the big screen. Ironically, in recent years, streaming platforms approached her to adapt it as a limited series, but Keaton declined, insisting it must remain a theatrical feature, a creative conviction that may have doomed it to remain unmade. She stood by that belief because she felt the story's impact relied on audiences experiencing it in one sitting, her longtime agent explained. Though she received generous offers to adapt it for television, Diane refused to trade artistic integrity for convenience, a decision that cost her the chance to see her most meaningful work completed. This revelation reframes how we see her. Behind the wit and warmth was a filmmaker waging a quiet, lifelong fight against Hollywood's gender bias, choosing authenticity over profit, even when it meant silence instead of applause. And that strength, perhaps, connects directly to what may be her most moving story, the real reason she became a mother.
Diane Keaton's adoption of her daughter Dexter in 1996 and son Duke in 2001 as a single woman in her 50s drew widespread attention and helped shift public perception about late-life motherhood. Yet few knew the deeper, private journey that led her there. Her path to becoming a mother began after a heartbreaking pregnancy loss in her early 40s, a tragedy she kept hidden, shared a friend who was by her side. The relationship she was in ended partly over disagreements about children. When she learned she was expecting after the breakup, she viewed it as destiny, only to lose the baby 5 months later. Friends say the grief that followed reshaped her perspective, leading her toward adoption not as a trend, but as a deeply personal choice about love and family. Those close to her recall that Diane had quietly studied adoption since her 30s, said someone involved in the process. The loss only hastened what she already felt called to do. Over several years, she researched, met adoptees, and reflected on her readiness before finally taking the step. Her journals show she was acutely aware aware of her fame's potential impact and went to great lengths to shield her children from it. She enforced strict privacy boundaries that she never relaxed. A child development expert who worked with her noted how mindful she was of the psychological effects of celebrity. To give her kids normalcy, she used her mother's last name for school forms and lived in neighborhoods where her career wasn't the focus. Perhaps most striking is how motherhood reshaped her professional path. After adopting her children, Keaton consciously took on more commercial roles with shorter schedules and greater financial stability, choices that critics sometimes dismissed, but which she made intentionally. As her former business manager recalled, Diane often wrote about wanting to avoid the financial strain she saw in her own upbringing. She prioritized her children's stability above everything, even prestige. This understanding reframes her later career, not as artistic decline, but as a deliberate pivot to protect her family's peace. Motherhood wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a fallback from fading roles, emphasized a longtime friend. It was a lifelong dream finally realized, pursued with the same resolve she brought to every chapter of her extraordinary life. Across these revelations, a truer image of Diane Keaton emerges, a woman far more layered, purposeful, and visionary than the quirky charm she projected. Behind that disarming smile stood a relentless artist and devoted mother who always chose meaning over ease. A relentlessly driven visionary, she braved Hollywood's harshest storms while keeping her truest self hidden from public scrutiny. What makes these discoveries so striking is how completely they reshape our perception of Keaton's influence. She wasn't merely an actress who brought unforgettable roles to life. She was also a designer whose architectural work still dot California's landscape, a musician with an unseen portfolio of songs, a collaborator who molded legendary films without recognition, and a survivor who faced loss and illness without ever asking for sympathy. Even more astonishing, she achieved all of this while presenting a public image that seemed sincere and unguarded. The offbeat charm and restless energy that became her signature weren't an act, they were real, though they reflected only a glimpse of the woman who contained far more than she ever revealed. Recognizing these private layers of Keaton's story doesn't lessen her legacy, it magnifies it profoundly. The woman who appeared to fumble delightfully through life was in truth steering it with rare intention and precision. The performer who championed eccentric individuality was in reality crafting choices drawn from personal truths that few ever knew. Diane Keaton's true brilliance lay not only in her artistry, but in her mastery of authenticity, the power to seem open while fiercely preserving the parts of herself that remain sacred. In a business that often demands complete transparency, she built invisible walls that safeguarded her spirit while still offering fans someone real to admire. Reflecting on her extraordinary path, from her Oscar-winning performance in Annie Hall to her later triumphs in Something's Gotta Give, we can now recognize the full depth of her accomplishment. She wasn't just portraying independent women making tough decisions, she was living that strength every day, with humor, grace, and fearless resolve. Diane Keaton's death marks the closing of a remarkable era in Hollywood's story, yet the insights revealed since her passing invite a deeper understanding of the brilliant, layered woman behind the trademark glasses and infectious laugh. These 10 revelations don't replace the Diane Keaton we celebrated. They prove she was even more extraordinary than anyone imagined. The woman who once seemed to embody quirky self-expression was in truth moving through life with sharp clarity, guided by principles few could comprehend. As we honor Keaton's enduring impact on cinema, style, and culture, we now glimpse the astonishing life that stretched far beyond her screen persona, that of an architect, artist, writer, and mother whose creativity knew no boundaries. If these insights into Diane Keaton's unseen world inspired you, remember to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden stories of Hollywood's most intriguing icons. Share in the comments which revelation most reshaped your view of the Diane Keaton you thought you knew. Thank you for spending time with us as we uncover the fuller truth of an artist whose brilliance continues to unfold. A woman who gifted the world with her performances while quietly building a vibrant, multi-dimensional life beyond the camera's gaze.